Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is part of our continuing series where we talk to professors, reporters, writers, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody who can talk intelligently about the state of American politics and division in America. Is it bad? Is it good? Is it not really a problem? Or should we be deeply concerned? This is a series where we've already interviewed about 200 professors of political science across multiple universities in America. With us today, it is our privilege to have Shaun Bowler, Department of Political Science at UC Riverside. Thank you for coming out. Shaun Bowler is the professor of political science in the political science department at UC Riverside. That's the article he talked about. He wrote a lot of books, or has been part of a lot of books on democracy, losers' consent, elections and democratic legitimacy, democratic choices, politician scandals and trust in government, democracy institutions and attitudes about citizen influence on government, party discipline, satisfaction with democracy in the European Union, electoral strategies, enraged or engaged, preferences for direct citizen participation. So a lot of studies, a lot of focus in Europe, but general studies looking at democracy and consent to the governed overall. He also wrote this book, The Future is Ours: Minority Politics, Political Behavior, and the Multiracial Era of American Politics. Today's demographic reality is a majority-minority America, where racial and ethnic minorities comprise a growing share of the U.S. population and electorate and are themselves becoming more diverse and representing more decisive votes. How America evolves as a society and polity depends on whether and how these new Americans access and are accommodated by existing institutions. Boy, I couldn't agree more. I got a story for you. Yeah, really right on. And then this is the article we'll talk about where Shaun was mentioned. California secession has no credibility, but the anchor is real in Newsweek. And we'll get to what Shaun said in a second. Professor, did I get anything wrong with your background, with your bio? Is there something we need to correct or state now?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, you got it well. Thank you.
Okay. I do have to ask, so you're originally from Europe?
I am. I'm originally from the UK. I moved to California 89, so I'm a Californian now. I know I don't sound it, but I can't get rid of the accent. Every time my students, sometimes every student gets student evaluations. You know, we get how he's got. Yeah, he's okay as a professor, but can't we get someone who speaks English? And it's like, look, so, but I can't do an American accent.
Yeah, 1/3 of California is immigrants or comes from other places. So you are very Californian.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I share with some of the students. So,
yeah, you're very Californian. Yeah, we are full of immigrants and people from all over the world. Well, that's perfect. So you've lived in Europe, you've lived in California for a while, and you study democratic political systems. Let me start with the basic question. Is political division in America happening? Is it bad? Is it not bad? Is it overblown? Don't worry about it. Or, oh my God, you guys are ticking off things that show you're moving towards the last ring of hell pretty damn quick. Which one, Professor, in your opinion? and answer, please, both as an academic and somebody who's living on the ground in this experiment, in this cauldron, while we ask if the temperature is too hot.
Yeah, I mean, the temperature is too hot because at the end of the day, it's just politics. We need to sort of take a step back and think about things of us ourselves as people and as citizens of the state that we have going for us, that we share a lot, that we're parents, we're children of our parents, and all of us, I think, deal with a bunch of stuff on a day-to-day basis. I'm hoping this is going to be relevant in a minute. Different. You know, I mean, I think for a lot of people, politics is a pretty secondary kind of thing. We have stuff, you know, our kids have got soccer practice, or, you know, or there's a test coming up, or at work there's a deadline coming up, or my mum, who's kind of getting on in years, had a fall or something. We have these day-to-day pressures. We have the traffic's bad, the car is restricted. We have all those. And politics is secondary for a lot of people, I think. But it doesn't seem that way. It seems that for people at the extremes, it's become the only thing that matters, the major thing that matters. And there's a lot of temperature about a lot of things that we disagree about. And that seems to be quite common. So it's not, so I'm going to say, so I think my basic point is we should recognize that a lot of people aren't as wound up about politics as they are on, for example, Fox TV or MSNBC. That has kind of a business model of catering to angry people and wanting to have angry people and making people angry, makes them donors to the party, this sort of stuff. There's a whole pathology of getting people worked up. But for most of us, it's that, we get along with everyday life. But we get along with everyday life, and I've got a small example, and I hope it makes sense. Is that every now and then I walk my dog. I meet a neighbour who walks a dog, and for the election we wore different t-shirts and different hats, and we still stop when our dogs meet and we chat and how are things going in the neighbourhood and how are things going with the family, and move on. I think a lot of people are like that and kind of want it to be that way.
Okay.
That said, and this really comes to there are real concerns about.
That said. Got that out of the way. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important to say. We can have differences of opinion, and in fact, about lots of things, and still get along. And in fact, I'm going to come back. I'll finish on the differences, but I'm going to make a detour there through how extreme things have become, not just here, but overseas too. And one of the worries that academics have is that there seems to be, in the jargon, a backsliding, that what was established set of assumptions about how democracy should work, about there should be an independent judiciary, that there's a value in having an independent press, that things like civil liberties and civil rights are important, those sorts of things are being walked back. And they're being walked back pretty dramatically in some places. Often people want to talk about Viktor Orban in Hungary as an example of that. People would also include as a left-wing example a little AMLO in Mexico, who was there for the previous 6 years as president of Mexico. Is that around the world we see this stepping back from what we thought were assumptions that everybody shared. And the concern clearly in the US is there's being step backs there on that. And that's led by really motivated elites, motivated political actors who are more extreme than the people in the middle. So there is a concern. There's a concern about where that's leading to. Just this week, there was a newspaper stories that the Speaker of the House of Representatives was kind of trailing, kind of not, the idea that if the courts ruled against what his party wanted to do, he'd be happy winding up federal courts just to ensure that this was Speaker Johnson about federal courts, which is, a pretty serious threat if you believe that the independence of the judiciary matters. So there are concerns. I think the academic community, both left-wingers and right-wingers, liberals and conservatives, are concerned about what this means for democratic processes. And I want to come back on differences because I realize I've been talking a lot.
Please.
I do want to come back to we are going as citizens of the state. We're going to be different on lots of different things. And so the examples I use with my students are always, what do we want for dinner? As a group of whatever the students.
Sure.
We never agree. And so even in a simple level, it's like, what do we want tonight? Do we want pizza? Do we want burgers? What do we want? We disagree a lot on how we want things, what we want, when we want it. And so disagreement's a pretty fundamental part of human society, just disagreeing. But the problem is when those disagreements get out of hand. And so there is this odd sense in which we almost think that disagreements are awful, that we have to have conformity, that everybody has to agree with us all the time. And we're going to take some steps to do that. We're going to muzzle journalists or shut down courts and this sort of stuff. It's not going to end it because the disagreement is always there. So the problem of democratic institutions is how do we manage those conflicts? How do we handle those disagreements peacefully? Sorry, I've spoken a lot.
No, you're right.
You asked a big question.
Well, I think you're getting it. So there's always been division. Democracy's rough and tumble. Things weren't always perfect, but people could talk to each other to a degree. Sure. At the same time, January 6th, A lot of people thought that that's an insurrection. I know that in America there's a debate about that, but there doesn't seem to be one looking at it from the world stage. You had people march into the Capitol to kind of forcibly change power, and then you had one of the two parties condemn it and then walk back their condemnation. You got to go back to 1812 with the British for the last time that something like that happened. You have a presidential candidate say that he wants to overturn the election, lead the insurrection, is cleared by the courts, and becomes more popular by half the country. When I ask people, does that sound like a stable Western country? Absolutely nobody says yes.
Yeah, because it doesn't. I mean, it's these are not hallmarks of a stable, peaceful democracy.
So that would be you agreeing that that's bad and that's not normal and that's not the course of typical American behavior and that's new and bad. Would that be fair?
Yes. Can I? I'm sorry to do this. Can I do like can I do like an academic answer?
Go, yeah. Please.
Oh, I mean, so yes, it's clear. It's not what we're used to. It's not what we see as democratic practice, and it's not just that they were worrying in and of themselves. There's a concern about where does it lead. So where does it stop? I mean, who can then invade the capital? Who is it okay to, and under what conditions is it okay to do it, and under what conditions is it okay to shut down a court? So it's not clear where this stops, and it's not clear that Republicans are going to like the answer, for example, when they're in the minority next. Because if it's good for the, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If it's good for the Republicans when they're in power, Democrats when they're in power can do the same sort of thing, encourage political protest, encourage political violence, and so on. So it's out of the ordinary. It's out of bounds of what we would think of as acceptable democratic practice, and it's really worrying for what's going to happen. I mean, because next time what happens, and that becomes problematic because now one of the worries is that some in the Republican Party are going to be thinking, oh yeah, this could happen to us in a few years' time. So we better not allow that to happen. So we better put it, it's a really worrying sort of.
Yeah, we better not lose those elections, whatever we got to do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things though is that, and I say this as both originally from the UK and America, is that often the received version of American and British history is much more flattering and has a much more peaceful cast to it than actually took place. And I've got two examples. One was recently, for example, I just visited Manzanar, the prison camp for Japanese Americans in the Central Valley, which was a very sobering experience.
Been there, it is.
What happened to our fellow, many of our fellow Californians, neighbors.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty graphic and kind of local example. I guess, Marcus, you're in Fresno, is that right? So
there is one in Fresno. I am in Fresno, and we do have one at the Fresno Fairgrounds. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good memory. Nice.
And we have, I love Fresno. And we've been there, but it's kind of halfway between. We've seen what happens to people, and we've got other examples in California history, the Zoot Suit riots. We've got other examples.
Sure.
But also in America more generally. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to find now is some account of the 1960s in the US, which is before my time in the country, before my time as a grown-up as well. But that was a particularly violent time. I mean, you got assassination attempts, mass unrest, mass riots. But the democratic process then was violent and messy and out of control and met with repression. And so it's a yes and. So yes, I would agree that the January 6th was out of the bounds of normal democratic practice. And at one time, as you pointed out, both Democrats and Republicans agreed that. And in the Capitol themselves, both Mitch McConnell was talking about how terrible it was to do this, who is as concerned.
Yeah.
And they put that back.
Yeah.
You're right.
The 1960s was more violent. However, again, nobody stormed the Capitol. and you did not have one party basically back that's never happened before. Additionally, so that's new. And then the guy leads an insurrection. They tried him a couple times. He got away from all of them and then became the presidential candidate. That's also new. That's never happened in U.S. history. Additionally, a president saying, "I'll be a dictator on day one. We're looking for enemies within. This will be the last election you'll need to have." That's also very new. That hasn't happened, as I understand, previously. So these are some marked departures. Additionally, when we look at the Supreme Court, it's the most conservative it's been in about 90 years, according to NPR. So we're kind of going into some new territory. And while the 60s was more violent, you didn't have people, and this is what I've heard from some professors, you didn't have people going, "Well, I don't know if your guy won the election, and so I'm going to spend the next 4 years doubting if he even won. And I don't know if you guys secretly run a deep state, and so maybe I need to overthrow the Capitol physically to check into that. And I'm not sure if you guys are running things correctly. So let me overhaul the entire federal administration and go after individuals at an individual level like they do in a broken Latin American democracy." That's all new. None of that was happening in the 60s. One of the phrases that I heard was, "Yeah, it was more violent, but people believed in common institutions, and that common belief in shared institutions is dead now." And that's different between now and then. How do you feel about that?
Boy, you say a lot in these comments.
I'm sorry.
That's good.
I'm sorry. We're 60s more violent, but more unified. Now is less violent, but you have people questioning if you ran the presidency, or "I don't want to follow the courts," or "I'm not going to do what the Supreme Court says," or "I'm going to doubt that your guy's president for 4 years." None of that happened in the 60s.
Yeah, and I would. The only thing I would sort of comment on is it's not that the Supreme Court is. Maybe I'll enter this way. So it's not that the Supreme Court's conservative so much. It's Republican. It's not. It's partisan Republican. It's not liberal versus.
Sure.
That means no longer an arbiter coming at it from a point of view of a neutral referee or neutral umpire or an umpire with some good. It means that they're putting the thumb on the scale for one particular party and one particular political agenda. And that's the worrying thing, is that because what's, I think, true in what you said and is deeply worrying is that there is this lack of support for democratic institutions and the democratic process. And what the democratic process means is sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. And there's a refusal to accept that. And it is this, no, the institutions aren't neutral anymore. They're biased against us and they're supposed to be biased for us. And that's really problematic and really worrying, because we have these ideas of democratic legitimacy, which rest on the belief that what voters think about their political institutions matter. They need to believe that their courts are not biased. And now we don't really have that so much anymore. I mean, so it's all very well saying, "Oh, the votes were miscounted," but now it's like, are you going to get a fair shake in a federal court? No? Or what?
I've never heard the amount of politicians saying maybe we need to not listen to these courts than I have in the last 5 years. I'm 48 years old. I've been following politics since I was 18, about 30 years. Yeah. I've never seen this many federal level officials, California officials saying, maybe we just don't follow the courts. I mean, and I try to explain to people, do you understand that's what the South said right before they seceded was, maybe we don't follow your institutions. Maybe we don't hang out with you. Maybe we don't do what you say. And I'm like, that's secession talk. California's like, no, it's not. I just don't want to follow the courts, and I don't want to pay federal taxes, and I don't want to do what the federal government says. But that it's the same thing. I mean, that's where that goes.
Yeah, it is. You're exactly right about that. It does. Yeah, I think so. I mean, because the idea is that institutions, sometimes you win. It's like the referee or an umpire in any kind of sporting game, right? They're supposed to be pretty neutral and political, and lots of institutions like courts are supposed to. They may have a point of view, is it a foul or not, but they're not supposed to put the thumb on the scale for one team all the
time. And that's, so I just, and some people said that the courts in America at the federal level have been too liberal for decades. There's an argument there. I'm just saying that there's some people saying that with the Supreme Court now, you got to go back to the 1920s to find a court that was that conservative according to typical American opinion, and that's from National Public Radio. And the last time the Republicans, well, because a lot of people aren't recognizing that, yeah, the Republicans got the House, Senate, and presidency. That comes and goes every 12 to 20 years. You got to go back a century to find the Republicans have the House, Senate, presidency, and Supreme Court all aligned. That hasn't happened in close to about 100 years. And the last time that happened was right before the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Just
I mean, that's a worrying time.
Yeah, they were in charge right before the Great Depression.
Yeah. I mean, one of the puzzles is, so the academic puzzles is, by just agreeing to everything that the Republican government wants to do, the courts then have kind of given up any claim to being independent, or giving up their claim to being a balanced or separate source of authority from the legislature and the executive. So they've kind of ceded a lot of power. And 2 weeks ago, there was, I think, Chief Justice Roberts was responding to some comments from the president. The president wanted to impeach a judge, and Chief Justice Roberts' comments were something like, now, let's use our inside voices. So, and it's like, well, it's kind of difficult now to believe that it's like that if you are so clearly on one side, then it is a problem for democratic legitimacy. So that you've got, so kind of reframing what you said. I'm so going to put your words back at you, so to speak, that are going on, and think that one is, there are these, we're going past, they're just blowing past the guardrails of what we think of as normal democratic action. Now, it's more violent, it's more aggressive, it's less tolerant, it's less respectful. And the problem is then, for the longer run, what do we do about that? Can we put that genie back in the bottle?
Do you think it can be fixed? And if so, what are what's the magic solution, or the top two best solutions?
Boy, if I had a magic wand.
This is what I do. So here's the magic wand.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody. I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah. Okay.
And you'll virtually grab it, and with this magic wand, you can go. Well, there you go. Okay, I'm going to pass it to you, and then you. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You go. Poof. And you have the ability to change laws, to change opinions, to change the sentiment of the American people. You can make it where they all agree that this law is good. What would you do to fix political division in America? How can it be done? What is it required? What's the magic answer?
Oh, I don't have magic. I'm sorry. I'm okay.
Professor, come on. You need to. We just talked about how America's becoming divided, and it's not good. Now people are scared. They're looking for answers. We need you to say, here's the problem, and here's the solution. And the solution will definitely work to bring everybody back together and put all of Humpty Dumpty's men back on the wall together. What is that magic solution that fixes America, Professor?
I think there are a couple of things that might help. One would be if political elites and candidates behaved as if this was a long-term project and not just about winning the next election cycle and winning the next round of donors. There's work. The book is called How Democracies Die, and the work there says, it's what political elites do, so elected leaders and candidates and so on. What they do really, really matters, partly because it's their actions that see the threats against judges and so on, but also because they have an important voice in shaping public opinion. And so what you need are then, that puts the onus on the Republican Party because they're in power. If the Democrats were doing this and they were in power, it would be the Democrats, but it puts the onus on the Republican elites to become more moderate in what they say, and more moderate in the sense that they realize that these institutions are there for the long term. You may win something. Now, you may win a battle, but you're going to lose the war. So that you may win some ruling on campaign contributions or something, or shut down a particular journalist. But over the longer run, we're better off with democratic institutions. And I think that's where a lot of academic unease comes from, because there's a lot of academic work in political science and economics which says that democracy is a better way of doing things. We are sort of more prosperous and healthier under democratic rules. But that means rule of law. It means a restraint on what executives do, whether that's kings or emperors or presidents or whoever. Democracy is a better way of doing it. And so having members of the political elite recognize that and start speaking up for it would be a really helpful thing to do. That's what the literature says. Another thing that might be helpful would be, and I know this is going to sound strange, but
please.
The Supreme Court sort of ruled in Citizens United that independent expenditures were unregulated, and we've got unregulated independent money, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, just sluicing through the system in a way which doesn't always connect people to political parties. So this is, I'm going to sort of smuggle in an argument here, which is that it might be better if political parties were a bit stronger, in the sense that as organizations, that they were more in control of their campaigns, they were more in control of the promises they made. But the thing is, with all this independent expenditures out there, essentially lots of political functions are outsourced to entrepreneurs. And then you get that, then you get into the whole fundraising, misinformation, getting people angry enough to donate money because, boy, they're going to do something to our kids or not do something to our kids, or whatever it is. So the two things I would do if assuming this was a magic wand, would be get the elites to realize it's not just about today, but where it's about 10 or 15 years from now. It's not just about the next election cycle. It's about how we are together. And I think change that rule about independent expenditures in the campaign. The other thing I think, is, the media environment is often emphasizes the extremes, but I think every now and then it would be good to emphasize a couple of things. One is that politics isn't the be-all and end-all for a lot of people. They have real challenges that they face every day, and we need to, for all the owning the libs or whatever they think, we need to actually address the challenges people have.
Sure.
And the other one is, there are still, even in this environment, there are still many politicians of both left and right, Democrat and Republican, who are sort of hardworking, decent-minded public servants who are trying to do a good job. And there's a center here. There's a center for our community and a center for our politics that isn't getting the attention because it isn't as glamorous on TV.
Yeah, well, right there. So, okay, so now we know what the solution is. Thank you. This is awesome. So if we could get the political elites to believe or behave like it was a long-term project and don't just do whatever it takes to just win at all costs, recognize that you can cause damage to the system and it's a long-term thing. Sometimes you lose. The institutions are important. They have to recognize that institutions are important. Don't just tear down institutions to win an election. And unlimited money as political parties is not good. The corporations are massively more influential in the political parties. So maybe the parties could be more independent. And you need to recognize that, the extremity of politics is not something most people are interested in, even though that seems to be a lot of what you see on TV.
I think so. You must talk to, you said you talked to a couple of hundred people.
Yeah.
I've seen some of them. But you must see lots of people that you don't agree with them politically necessarily, but you think, oh, that's a decent person. I'd go for a beer with them, or I wouldn't mind if they were my elected mayor or something.
I did, and I tried to, but as a minority, when you see a guy give the Nazi salute on television twice and then accidentally leak a text message saying Hitler didn't kill all those people, you know damn well what that is. Yeah. When you watch a presidential candidate get nominated by the Republican Party and say he wants to reenact the Eisenhower deportation ban, which is called Operation Wetback, the most racist term you can use for Latin people, and he accidentally was the guy who said Mexicans are rapists years before, and he's standing next to a vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, who only won his Ohio race by running a TV commercial that said, "Do you hate Mexicans?" and then promoted Stephen Miller, the only person in the congressional Hispanic Caucus is listed as an avowed white supremacist as undersecretary for immigration, you kind of see what's up. And that doesn't say it's cool or it's fair. What that says is crystal knocked in a new version, and watch out.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend that kind of.
I have more examples.
It's not. You don't need more. I mean, how many do you need to make them? I mean, you only need one or two. There are good people on both sides after Charlottesville. I mean,
yeah,
lots of examples of talk that should be worrying, I think, for people.
How am I supposed to be? You're cool, because I always hear JD Vance is cool. JD Vance is cool. JD Vance looks like a guy I could have a beer with. Great. He ran a TV commercial, said, "Do you hate Mexicans?" Screw you for life. So how do I bridge that? How do I go, oh, you know what? It's cool that you hung out with white supremacists, and it's cool that you said Mexicans are rapists. Let's come together. Or, bro, you crossed the line that I can never deal with you again. For example, I have this one thing. This is an example I give to people. Let's say, it's a little bit morbid, but forgive me, this works for people. Let's say we're at your mother's funeral. I walk past you, I walk up to the casket, and then I smack your mother right in the face in the casket. And then I walk and I go, wow. And then I come back the next day and I say, bro, I'm sorry. By the way, I took care of the funeral costs. I bought a hotel. I bought your mom's plot. I bought her flowers. We're totally cool, right? Everything's forgiven, right? We're good, right? Nobody says yes to that question.
Yeah, nobody will say yes to that. I mean, that's a pretty striking example. Okay,
for me, hearing a president say Mexicans are rapists and a vice presidential candidate who has a TV commercial that says, do you hate Mexicans? And then he appoints a guy who's called a white supremacist by the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And then he has another guy who gives the Nazi salute twice, doesn't contextualize it, doesn't explain it, doesn't apologize for it, and then accidentally leaks text messages days later saying maybe Hitler didn't kill all those people. What is a decent person who knows what that talk means supposed to think, and how do you bridge that to say, I can work with you? Because to me, I've studied the Nazi regime for decades, and I lived through the 1990s and all the xenophobic racism they had against Latin people, and it smells exactly the same. To then bridge a gap with them and meet with them, to me, sounds like, Mark, you got to be cool with people talking trash on Mexicans and being racist in order to get along. I don't want to do that. And I don't think most minorities want to do that either, because it means you're disrespecting yourself. We were told never deal with those people. You guys need to change your opinion. And now we're being told, well, I know Elon sent out a text message that kind of looks like what a traditional anti-Semitism Nazi trope would be. But come on, guys. I literally have family members saying that to me. And I am flabbergasted what to say. Flabbergasted. I don't even know how to respond to
that. I'm not going to defend that kind of commentary for people, and I'm not. I mean, your reaction is entirely understandable and legitimate to that. I don't think there's not many other ways of seeing and interpreting the acts that you've just mentioned.
There's also Jason Aldean. When he had Jason Aldean sat next to him, Trump did, and Jason Aldean did the country music song "Don't Try That in a Small Town," which features a lot of footage of white people beating up minorities, and was filmed in front of the last courthouse to hang a black man dead. He said, I didn't know. Whoops, accident. This courthouse is featured in 3/4 of my music video, which Donald Trump loves and celebrates, and I'm sitting next to Donald Trump, and my video accidentally featured the last courthouse in America to hang a black man dead. By the way, Jason Aldean also did blackface of Lil Wayne a year before, but we're not supposed to interpret anything of that. I mean, to me, this sounds like a guy who hates black people. And then Donald Trump said, hang out next to me for the entire time while I'm being nominated. What message does that send to people?
I'm not going to disagree with you on anything to do with that. I mean, that's offensive and appalling. And But I'm going to try and ask, sort of change in two ways, I think.
Sure.
Because, get in touch with my inner professor here to say there are two
Sure.
things I want to push on. One will be, you said in passing, you've got relatives who say, it's just a joke, or just there's no big deal about that. And the evidence was at this last election, Donald Trump appealed to a surprisingly large number of, especially young men, but young African-American, Hispanic men.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other one is, I think this is one of the things that maybe I would hope to sort of change perspective on, is that, yes, those the examples you said from national politics are just enraging in lots of ways. I'm not trying to gainsay that. I'm not trying
I'm not trying to browbeat anything. I'm just saying the question is, if I'm that upset, how do I work with those people? How do I go to my relatives and go, it's cool that you like Elon and he tweeted out a Nazi trope. We'll have a beer together. How do I get past the fact that I have been raised that all that behavior is disgusting and racist and I should have nothing to do with it? And now they're in power. I have to work with them to make this work.
Yeah, I think it is this is where your secession movement comes in, right? That maybe that means we don't have to work with them.
Well, this is, we're getting calls from transgender people, gay people, Muslims, Black people, Latin people, undocumented, immigrants, political protesters, and they are terrified. They're not going, it's cool. Yeah. They're going, I'm scared that I'm going to be next. And I've heard them crying on the phone. They seem to be at the point where I can't work with these people. So where do we go from here?
Then it is sort of exiting from the political system, and secession is one of the ways that you do this one. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know clearly, obviously, I'm an old white guy. I don't have.
You're a Californian.
I am a Californian.
You are a Californian, and you understand California.
But I don't think of myself as, so it's not, I'm not going to be personally exposed to those abuses in the way that you are, for example, or my students are, or my friends. I don't have that personal experience. I don't have that insight for doing it, and I'm not going to defend that kind of treatment of anybody for any reason. I don't think it's appropriate. But these are just, these are unacceptable words of truth. So it's completely understandable that you would be at the least outraged and offended and upset and hurt and just angry at that kind of treatment, because it's not fair and it's not right. It's just not right to treat people that way. If we focus on that, and if that's the focus, then we aren't going to solve this. We aren't going to move beyond where we are right now. And we need to find a path around it. We need to find a way of doing it. And it's like, well, is it on you, Marcus, to figure out a way to do that? Or shouldn't it be also on these other people to figure out a way to stop saying those sorts of things and stop behaving that sort of way?
He's been doing it since 2016, 2015, maybe, if you consider a little bit of the warm up to the campaign and the way he was talking about Obama with the birther thing. Because Trump started the birther. He didn't start it, but he really pounded on the Obama birther thing, which I will give you that initially, maybe you could ask, given Obama was here and there around the world, but at some point that became just a racist trope. And it was just a way of saying, you're not an American and you're not one of us. So you add that, and we're now at the year 2025. We're looking at a 10-year history now, 3 elections where this guy kind of dabbles with racism and xenophobia, and he's still here. To me, that seems like this has become concretized in American politics. What was once you couldn't do, now you can. We're at 3 election cycles where you can do dog whistling racism and toy around with xenophobia and win an election, or at least get close to half. I don't know if that genie ever goes back in the bottle. You teach a child it's okay to start punching your brother in the face. How do you get him to go, oh, it's wrong? After you let him punch a bunch of kids a bunch of times, maybe they're like, I like this. I'm used to the taste of this. We let the cat out of the bag. How far does it get where we can't wheel this back because we're so used to doing it in this new screwed up manner?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's first let me apologize, Michael. I mean, because again, I'm coming at this from a very different personal experience than you
Yeah.
are going to have with this, and that's a difficult thing to bridge, and I don't want to sort of ignore it or downplay it. I just acknowledge it and sort of move a different way.
I love you being here, by the way. Thank you for coming on the show. You're an awesome human being.
Thank you for saying that. But I mean, I think while it's clear that there are a set of racial attitudes among the population, any population, including the US population, in which those appeals still work. I mean, there are still Klan members, for example, somewhere. I think there's a case to say that, that the Republicans are winning not because of those appeals, but sort of despite of them, that they won on bread and butter, concerns about the inflation and concerns about the economy. And one of the things that I think gives grounds for optimism is that the survey evidence we have and the evidence we have of younger voters and younger people is that they don't have much time for those kinds of beliefs, especially if you're thinking of Californians or.
Absolutely.
I mean, my kids grew up in California, and they're proud Californians, and they grew up and their friends were from all different kinds of groups that you could imagine. And that was wonderful that they would play with a bunch of kids, and some would be Hispanic and some would be Asian and some would be gay and some would be straight. And that was just how things are, that people came with these different attributes, and that was fine. And I think one of the reasons it gives me optimism for the future is that younger people are much more accepting of each other and accepting of what each other do. And so with that in mind, I think that some of the reasons why people win elections is that that there are these appeals to race and racism. And there's a guy called Mike Tesler at UC Irvine who's written about this, written a really good book with I think it's with Lynn Vavrek at UCLA, talking about this in relation to 2016. And it's got a pretty persuasive argument about how strong and important and influential racial arguments are. I'm not trying to gainsay that. But it seems that this last cycle, a lot of what concerned people were bread and butter issues about inflation. I know it's silly to talk about now, to talk about things like the price of eggs or rent in particular. Rent's a big issue, house prices for us. Yeah, that's the guy. And it's...
you can see it here. I'm going to pull it up for everybody.
Yeah, he's a really smart and thoughtful scholar. And I think he... on these issues, and I think he would be someone good to talk to.
Oh, absolutely. I will reach out to him. Awesome. Yes.
And so I think but there is this argument for this last cycle is that it's back to some of the concerns I raised a minute ago, that for a lot of people, politics is something abstract. It's something that happens on TV, maybe, or on news websites, or maybe they mention it on some of the talk shows that they may or may not tune into. But in a day-to-day sense, people have a set of concerns that are immediate and real. And
absolutely,
those seem to underpin. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. Yeah, post-racial or most racial race and politics in the Obama era, by Michael Tesler.
Yeah.
I'll definitely reach out to him.
So again, I don't want to make light of or diminish the issues and problems you experience and are talking about and you've had talking about. But if the question is, how do we get past it? Then I think it's recognizing that those sorts of concerns, well, they're real and awful for the people at the receiving end of them, just dreadful for the people at the receiving end of them. There are other things going on as well.
Well, I think that's it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. One of the worries is the way in which, for example, those kinds of attitudes affect local politics. Because this is a separate theme in academic literature. time was time was like 20, 30 years ago, like your city councillor or your mayor is like either you agreed with them or disagreed with them, but they weren't really bothered with national issues. It's
Right.
like whatever it is on,
Right.
I don't know, whatever the Smithsonian is doing or teaching or something. It's like,
Right.
no, I'm the mayor of Fresno. I've got to figure out how we're going to get these potholes fixed, or I'm going to figure out how we expand the sewers to the new. I've got some real questions. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is this sort of creeping influence of national politics and local politics. And that can, so your reaction is to Vance and Trump and people who are very national and making these highly publicized, thing. And the one place where I hope I was going to go was to say, yeah, but at the local level, if you talk to your local city councillors or you talk to your board of supervisors, even if you disagree with them, you're going to be able to go that it's not going to be like that. It's not going to be like talking to Vance.
True.
It's having a more respectful discussion of, yeah, we're both from this area. We see these problems. We identify these problems and solutions in common. We differ on this one, but we're both on the same side. And I think one of the damaging things is some of that is going now. But one of the ways I suggest is that local politics and that local action is more productive and where people can meet in the middle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would add, though, that from what I've heard, local news has almost been wiped out. So if you look over the last 10, 15 years, local news has been replaced with national news. So you used to have local newsrooms and they would go out and report on what was going on locally. Now they just have a news feed from like we used to have 410 separate media corporations in America before Obama. Now it's down to 6 or 5, mostly all in New York City. So you went from 410 to 5. Most Americans don't know that. And that feeds into all the newsrooms. So there's almost not local news coverage. People are being piped in to these national politics almost everywhere across America. The other pattern that I've noticed is what's called the big sort. This goes back to the 1990s. It says people are moving into ideologically similar communities. You used to only have about a third of America was what they called landslide election counties. So if you're a Republican presidential candidate, you win by 20 to 30 points over the Democratic candidate, right? That's a landslide election county. So if you're a Democrat, don't even bother running in that county, right? Because you'll lose by 20 points. It's not even worth it. That used to only be about a third of the country. Now it's 80%. So people are ideologically sorting themselves out, and we're wiping out local news. That looks to be where America's forming itself into this thing where it's just national news comes down and we all absorb it. And we don't have the infrastructure, local news, to battle that again. And we have now sorted ourselves into these communities where we don't meet people who have the other ideological opinion. And these two trends have gone on for about 15 to 30 years. What I've heard from professors is that it would be, quotes, a generational project to undo that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's true. There's a project out of Northwestern University in Chicago that documents local press coverage, and there's a lot of interest in trying to get charitable foundations to subsidize local press because of that reason, because you don't know about what's happening in Fresno with infrastructure, but you do know everything there is to know about the debate over the Smithsonian or whatever today's scandal is in DC. But the thing is, what you day to day is, and affects me day to day, is going to be, well, is the trash pickup working? Where do I get rid of? I mean, these very mundane things would affect us. How are the schools?
Sure.
How are the roads? How are the fire service? The other thing is, to make us gloomy, I'm sorry, is that one of the things we see is to make us gloomy and damn it is that along with this national news is you find political organizations organizing nationally. So if you're a local chapter of, we see this in school board elections, for example, you're a local PTA, then you can go online and you can find all kinds of resources from national organizations, national political organizations, that will show you to use it. So let's say both left and right, but let's say that you're a right winger this time, and you can find, you can download drafts of resolutions about not teaching what's it? I forgot the word right now. That's sort of the teaching on the agenda about sex education. For example.
Oh yeah, totally, yeah.
And you shouldn't.
Absolutely.
You can got the drafts of letters to the editor, or letters to the school board, or here's how to put together a flyer, or here's how to choose candidates and fundraise. So that you get national organizations that are organizing locally around national issues. So we do get this shrinking. I mean, you're exactly right. We do get this two things at the same time. The sort of shrinking of knowledge about the local community. It's all oriented towards the nation. And at the same time, we get this, we live in sort of more homogenous, politically homogenous bubbles. You do see this sorting. And that's,
yeah.
In ways.
And unfortunately, it seems like that's gone on for a while, Professor. It seems like this isn't new. That's been kind of there for a while. And when I hear the phrase generational project undo, that kind of scares me. That means we're not, even if we all agreed this is a problem and we all agreed on the solution, which is a huge ask, that would basically require a magic wand to get everybody to agree this is the problem and here's the solution. They're still saying 15 to 30 years to undo this.
Yeah, we'll do.
January 6th, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, part 7, by the time we actually get to the promised land.
We don't. I don't think we know that. I think what we have to see, though, is that we've had this experience and we've looked over a precipice, and we're going to step away from it. We are not at the point of stepping away yet, I don't think. But
fair enough.
People who would want to step away from it, who think about they're going to step away from it.
Let's go into that, if I may.
Sure.
The Calexit article. So this was the article.
Yeah.
You took a different of opinion, though. I was impressed. You seem to be saying, it probably won't happen, but there's some really good reasons why people would want this. Is that a fair summary?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think.
Spending, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we are Californians and we are different from other states, and that the things that preoccupy other states don't worry us so much.
That's what I was wondering.
That we have a set of values that are different from other states, but that's fine. That's what you'd expect. I mean, I'm going to say one thing, and then I'll come back to the secession. But we do disagree. I mean, the assumption here is disagreement's just inevitable because we're people. We're going to disagree about is this a problem, or what is the problem? And so when you say you're talking to your relatives about this or not, you may have different ideas of what the problem is to begin with, or whatever. And so we do have we do see things differently as a state, but then we see things differently as each other. But
sure.
Yeah, one of the things about federal structures is that they sort of have you see them in geographically big places: Canada, the US, Australia, Nigeria, India, geographically big places, and often ones that do have a lot of diversity to try and manage. That's more true of places like India and Nigeria, for example, and a little bit for Canada, than it is for the other places I mentioned. But you can either have this sort of coming together or holding together federalism. And the idea of it is to see whether or not the federal structure is going to be a good deal for the people involved. And
right.
I think there's a sense now that it's not such a good deal for California as it might be. We see that in the spending, and there is something called the Rockefeller Institute of Government. Rockefeller was, Nelson Rockefeller. I think it's the same Rockefeller who's the Republican.
No, you're talking about this. Yep, I know exactly what you're totally correct, Professor.
And it's got these. He's got these easy to see maps about how much we send to the federal government and how much we get back from the federal government. And there are a few states that are net contributors. It's mostly the big states sort of giving to the smaller states, but there's also overlaid with the blue states giving to the red states. And we give about, our total tax rate, we probably contribute something like $700 billion to the, oh, there we go, you got on the screen there, like 70 to 80 billion net. We're a net loss out of the state. That's about half the state budget every year we send to DC, that gives it to another state. And the question is, well, what do we get for that?
Right.
And we saw with the LA fires, we saw people in Washington saying, yeah, we're not going to help you with federal relief.
Thank you.
With disaster relief. So, wait, but that's our money. It's our money that we're spending, that you're putting restrictions on. Did you say that about the fires in South Carolina? And I don't think they've said that yet.
I have to thank you. Much honor. Thank you so much. Thank you. As I've told people, this is when Calexico got big. It wasn't when the initiative was filed. There was 2 articles. It was after Trump said, I don't know if I want to help you, when people were dead and bodies were on the ground and homeless, because I'm not sure I like your politics. Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty and Breaking Points also pointed this up. That enraged Californians. And you saw an explosion of news articles about Calexico within days of him making that statement.
Well, it's an exaggeration, because we're not the only net contributor. Like the state of Washington is a net contributor.
Sure.
Connecticut is a big net contributor. But we do give billions of dollars to the federal government. And so saying, and part of the reason why we do so poorly, I think, is that it's the political institutions don't work for us. So we get 2 senators for each state.
Yep.
Which means we get the same number of senators as does North Dakota. The joke that it's not really a joke; it's a professor joke, so it's not very funny. Is that
okay?
There are probably more people in California called Dakota than live in North Dakota.
Oh my God, that's hilarious!
They have 2 senators, and we have 2.
Yes. And how do you get all these Californians to believe democracy works for us when that situation's there?
Yeah, I think there is a scope there for an information campaign, and I think that talking about the different tax imposition and talking about how the sausage gets made in DC, because there is this sense in which North Dakota has exactly the same number of votes as California does, and if there's research on this, and I apologize to the colleagues who's from the East Coast whose name I can't remember, but there's a study on the U.S. Senate which said, if you're trying to put together a coalition of 51 votes in the Senate, it's pretty easy or pretty cheap to get people from the Dakotas involved, because we're going to give you some public spending or public welfare or something. Right. It doesn't take much to sort of spend in sort of North and South Dakota, but it takes a lot to make an impact in California. Yeah, there you go. That's the same. Massachusetts is another one.
There are other states, but California dwarfs them in total number of dollars that it sends by 2 to 3 times the amount. If you look at this, that giant fat orange bar is California. Yeah. The little tan bars are all of the other states. I mean, we blow away everybody in terms of the amount of money we lose. And it's just hard to tell people, hey, for example, in 2019, we lost $20 billion. $20 billion is what experts estimated it would take to permanently fix homelessness in the Bay Area forever. Like forever, permanently fixed it. In 1 year, we lost that amount.
It's a lot of money. And the question is, what do we get in return for it? And the answer seemed to be from the fires, not so much from the federal government. I mean, so one argument would be, maybe it's time then to revise the Senate so that the big states, let the big states like California and New York, Texas and Florida, if you want to keep it red, blue balance, would get 3 senators each or 4 senators each. So Germany's version of federalism, Australia's version of federalism have unequal sizes that reflects where the population is and reflects where the economy is, so that 15% of the economy of the US. And so there is an argument for saying, even if secession ends up being difficult, there's an argument for saying, isn't it time to renegotiate isn't it time to renegotiate the deal of federalism? So, for example,
Yeah.
and I'm coming back to this because when you were talking, clearly you were talking in a very personal and immediate sense about the sense of racism and discrimination you feel from
well, and if I may,
politicians,
transgender, women, Muslims, immigrants, protesters, undocumented Latin and Black people all have their own stories at my level of terror, and they represent about 65% of the California population.
It's a big number, and it's a personal experience. Again, it's difficult for me to talk about it given my own position, but maybe that would be less press if we were more independent from the federal government. Maybe it would matter less to people, and people would feel less threatened if the federal government wasn't so dominant in terms of what we do and how we do it.
That I've heard that, and unfortunately, it's gotten to this point. And then the question becomes: can you undo it? Can you return federalism? Could you pass a constitutional amendment to undo Citizens United, return some more balance, or redistribute senators?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then the other thing is, even if you could, there are about 45 states. It's called tyranny of the minority. It's a term that's out there. Basically, baked into the Constitution is preference for states, not individuals. And so about 45 states would lose if you got rid of the Electoral College, and would lose if you did this proper redistribution of senators. I mean, they have outsized influence because they're Wyoming, and they got 2 senators and a certain amount of Electoral College votes. So you have to get their opinion. We start making shifts. A lot of these states become politically impotent in a manner they haven't been in 200 years. How do we convince 35, 40 states, hey, for the good of America, we need to rearrange the system so that you're much less politically powerful, and we need to go to something more like a popular democracy format because that's more stable. And yeah, you'll become politically neutered in a manner you haven't experienced in forever, but it's the good thing for the country. And we have to convince about 2/3 of the states to do that since they're small. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And we saw with, for example, ERA in the 70s, Equal Rights Amendment, it's hard to get constitutional measure. There is a process for changing the Constitution, though. We could try it first before we get too discouraged about doing this one, because there is a fairness argument here that it's just so. For example, we're both from inland California. We're from the fashionable bits. I'm from the Inland Empire bit, and the 2 counties.
Yes.
Yeah,
Lived there. I lived there, Moreno Valley.
Yeah. Well, I'm next door to Moreno. I can see Moreno Valley from over there. So the IE has a population and an economy that would mean if we were a state, if the 2 counties were a state, we'd be like midway ranking of the state. And it's not like we would be a state than Idaho or Rhode Island and bigger in terms of population. We'd be bigger than like Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, these sorts of states that people think of as. There's just a basic level of fairness here that might well appeal to people because, and I do want to be optimistic about this because it took, we had a dark, we had an understandably dark, a dark period in this conversation, is that, people can be pretty reasonable, and people can be, if you have a discussion where it's not about blue or red, about something that's so abstract that happens in DC, you can say, doesn't this strike you as fairer to do it this way? And you recognize that they don't want to be, these people in these other states don't want to be made into a permanent minority and a permanent permanently on the outs. It's like, no, we're just talking about adjustments. So we'd have 3 senators from California instead of 2, 3 from you, so that we would get some greater say. It might be easier to change the number of seats in the House of Representatives because there's no magic number about 435. It's all arbitrary. We
Sure.
could have 535 and we could just distribute it more by population. Because again, I mean, it's our congressional seats are sort of pretty massive compared to those other states. So there are ways in which we could have changes that would affect the deal that we have. And the other way of doing it is perhaps right. It's certainly on the spending limit. Is that the thing right now is that because the Republicans are in power, because we have to look in the majority to change something. Is that there are 9 congressional representatives from California who are Republican, and maybe it's we could ask them to sort of stand up for the state to say, hey, maybe on this spending, maybe you need to send. When the governor of Alabama, the senator from Alabama says, I don't know, I think we should start putting restrictions on fire help and disaster relief. Maybe you 9 could stand up and say, that's our state and it's our money. You don't do that.
That would be nice. I do have to point out, though, Professor, that I was so shocked when Trump said, hey, I'm not sure I want to help because not sure I really like you guys, your politics, the way you do things. I mean, people had been burned alive. They're homeless. There's people destitute. And that's what he says. And then Speaker Johnson says that too. And if you go by the federal level of power, it's president, vice president, speaker. So you have 2 of the top 3 most powerful people saying this. That's never happened in U.S. history to have that attitude. I asked people, name the Republican who said, you know what, Mr. Trump, I voted for you. I liked you, but this is too far. You cannot talk to Americans this way. That's disgusting. Nobody could name anyone. So if no Republican was disgusted by that, Americans are dead, burned alive, on the ground, homeless, destitute. Screw you guys. 0 backlash from the Republican Party. How does that say a nation coming together?
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it gets people as angry as you are right now about that one, and it gets people talking about secession. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, this is back to this theme of the conversation. There's a short-term win and a long-term, and focusing on the short-term wins at all costs is going to get you to loser in the long term. And
Sure.
There is going to be. I think your proposal qualified for. You're gathering signatures.
It's collecting signatures. We're collecting signatures, but there's been a lot of support, and I'm trying to be unbiased in the interviews and ask people about the division of America, and then we get into the Cal-Exit solution. I don't necessarily try to push in these interviews, but I try to ask probing questions to see what it's at. A lot of people are upset about the Palisades thing, and they don't view it as short term. What they view as, we've been a donor state. If you're willing to say this to us one time ever, that's bad enough. I should have no faith in you for the future. Remember, I talked about the example of somebody walks into your mother's funeral.
Yeah.
Is that you're never going to forgive that. So that's basically, I ran that by them and everybody's like, yeah. So I've talked to a lot of LA people, at least 300. We even talked to a political science professor out of Harvard who said, quote, you guys in Cal-Exit are underestimating the amount of rage there is here at Trump. So when you look at it that way, they're saying, if you could ever treat Americans this way, we can't have faith in the future. I can't rely on you for my kids. Additionally, there's the LA Times survey that came out 6 months ago that showed 48% of Republicans across America viewed Californians as, quote, and I mean, quote, not American. 48% of Republicans across America, LA Times covered this widely, very reputable, not American. That includes some California Republicans who'd be more sensitive. If you pull out the California Republicans, we're talking over half of the Republican Party outside of California views this as not American. They literally said that. The LA Times editorial board covered that. And then 6 months later, we see 2 of the top 3 layers of power say, well, I'm going to treat you not as an American. They're looking at that going, that doesn't say stability. That doesn't say rest on me and your kids are going to be fine. What that says is, I need a new insurance policy. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two responses to that. One is, I mean, the simple one is, well, okay, well, give me my money back then. I mean,
Yeah,
it's right. It's
yeah, yeah,
the writing this is tax season. On average, each Californian spends $2,300 more than they get back, kind of speaking. I mean, it's a silly way of thinking of it, but it's $2,300. So instead of writing my check to Bob somewhere in Arkansas or something, it's like, give me my money back, Bob. I mean, you can have that opinion about me, but I'm not going to pay you for it. I mean, there's that. It's not fair for you to have that opinion like that in the future. The other one is, boy, I mean, it's difficult to have conversations about how real is that, and so it's valuable to have these sorts of conversations where you talk about these issues and try and turn them around in a different way, because as we know, given the web, given the incentives of the web and clickbait, and given the pathologies we see on lots of cable TV shows, you all the time you're trying to get people ticked off, you're trying to get them angry, you're trying to get you're moving towards outrage, and so if that's true, to the extent that's true, then give me my money back. I want my tax dollars back. I'd rather the 80 billion we give to the feds was spent on the California state budget so that they could do things here in the state.
yeah.
Even if I pay the same amount in taxes, maybe I'm better off if it's fixing the freeways or spending on the schools here at home. The other one is, there's always a bit of a pinch of salt you need to take for this stuff, because it's like, well, why were they asking the question? Who was it? And were they asking a bunch of Republicans who were just teasing? Or just going, yeah. I mean, I know it sounds like a horrible thing, but we've got to. In these days, you've got to always be a bit cautious about the information that's provided, and sort of take it with a pinch of salt, because there is this knee-jerk, let's make things controversial in the information environment, because that's how we get clicks.
Fair enough. It is a fact that no president's ever done that before. It is a fact that it's not happened, and it is a fact that there is no survey showing another state is viewed by such high numbers as un-American, and it is a fact that that survey came out 6 months before a real policy decision. I'm not going to help. That's a real policy decision that affects people's lives, and it comes right after a survey showing we're not sure. Additionally, I'd point out the Republican Party, when Trump was president, had their annual convention, the Republican National Convention, framed around the idea of how California was not American. You got to go back to basically 1820 to see, maybe someone did that with New York. That's a fact. LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle widely covered that. Additionally, you can look at the Prime Minister of Denmark, who jokingly said, we'll buy California. But in his comment, the Prime Minister of a foreign country said basically along the lines, it's clear Trump hates you guys in California, specifically you. And everybody on earth can see that. So the prime minister of a foreign country is calling that out. And they had a national convention of one party against California, and no one's seen anything like that in a century. And Trump, I think Deutsche Welle, there was many European publications, said, wow, looks like Trump hates California. And then you can fast forward to saying, I don't want to give assistance when people are dead, and that's never happened before. At some point, there seems to be a lot of data points saying, maybe this guy really has it out for this particular group. We protested him. We shut down his policies. We said we weren't going to follow him. And this is the only place where, when Trump came, we shut down the entire freeway grid, and he had to get out of his limo and walk across the freeway in some concrete blocks in order to get to his thing. No other place in America had that aggressive a reaction to shut down the entire grid, where the guy had to foolishly walk out of his. I mean, that might have upset him. Seems to take things personally. At that point, can we get to a point where that's? Additionally, I point out the Oroville Dam. Oroville Dam in California collapsed. LA Times San Francisco also covered the amount of reaction of Americans saying, good, I'm glad you're dead. I'm not making that up. You can look up Oroville Dam collapse, shocked by the Times San Francisco Chronicle, the number of people. There's also the Gilroy shooter, who was a conservative and came from Nevada specifically to kill Californians. And then there were conservatives who did videos kind of saying, well, that's what you get for your gun laws. So there's also surveys showing, I think in 2012 and 2018, amongst Fox News viewers, the most hated state in America, California. At some point, there's a lot of data showing that we have a particular focus on us. At what point can a reasonable person look at this data and go, damn, wow, you don't talk about anybody else that way, and you talk about us, and we got foreign countries saying, watch out, Cali, you looks like you got a target. At what point do we go, wow, that seems dangerous, and this is not normal, and I need to start thinking about how I may need not normal solutions to a not normal problem, right? Because no other state's dealt with this in maybe 160 years. So how do we deal with it?
Yeah, this is gonna. I'm sorry. You're bringing out my inner professor, where it's like,
Please,
okay,
please do.
We just stake out an alternative.
Please.
I think in terms of, well, if you're thinking of bad stereotypes, like there's always bad stereotypes based on California being the hippies in the 60s or something. It seems to be something like that.
Yeah.
There were old jokes, I remember, even from when I lived
Johnny Carson said the only culture in California is the yogurt. The jokes of California being
there you go. I think he was the one I was thinking.
Yes. They've always been weird and strange. Yeah.
It's just jealousy. It's just.
But that seemed to be kind of a funny look at those weirdos. Aren't they kind of strange? That's them. I watched some movie where a space alien came to Earth and he got in a taxi cab and the cab driver goes, you want me to take you to California? Because he's so bizarre. But it was tongue in cheek. It was funny. This is Republicans had a convention on how California is un-America and is going to destroy us all. They're doing surveys on what state you hate the most. It's California. I mean, they're every day on Fox News, Breitbart, Newsmax for the last 3 decades has been California is the source of all the bad ideas. Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, all these boogeymen come from there. Their force can't be managed. You have to take care of this. They're full of undocumented immigrants. They let 12-year-olds have sex change operations. I'm in the Central Valley. I'm disgusted by that messaging, but I see it all the time. And I don't see them really mention New York, a third as much as us. And I'm like, that's your next most liberal city. So at some point, if I'm going, I don't like you, 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 do I go, you know what? I think you actually don't like me.
Yeah. Stop. Yeah. Give me my money back. It's the next race.
Give me my money back.
Give me my money back.
Give me my money.
Yeah. But it is that. I mean, I think one thing. I mean, I think if you were from the US South, you would say, for years, people have painted me as a particular kind of person, as the hick or rube or hayseed or some sort of thing, and they've had, but then again, it bears out what you say, because I'm pretty sure if we were both, for example, having this conversation in Alabama or Georgia or somewhere, and we were doing that as well. Yeah, you know what? I'm sick of these people from the coast looking down their nose at us and saying that we're all like rubes and hayseeds and all the jokes about marrying your sister and this sort of stuff. And it's like, it's old for them after a while. And I'm not saying we started it. I'm not saying that we did it. What I am saying is there's a lot of that going around. I think the trash talking that we see in everything from video games to now the US Congress seems to make it sort of quite acceptable, unfortunately. But in the end, you're right. It ticks people off. And this is back to the theme, I guess, of one of our themes of the conversation is, there's a short-term win and then there's a long-term win. And which do you want? And the short-term win may be that you make some snarky comment that gets a laugh. Right. Long-term, it means that your big tax base is thinking of, maybe we don't want to be giving our money to you anymore.
There's 2 stories we tell. You already heard one, and I know they're weird, but the other one is, you're at your house, right? And your cousin comes by in his Ferrari. And then he walks up to your door. Hey, I need $1,000 for gas for my Ferrari that you helped pay for. And you're like, bro, I drive a Honda Civic and I'm barely making gas. Your problem. Give me my 1,000 for my gas for my Ferrari that you helped pay for. I don't care about your situation. And then you have to give them the money, and then you're even poor when you're driving a Honda Civic and they get to have the Ferrari because we subsidize 35 states to have better infrastructure than we do, and we've done it since the early 1990s. And I say, and you're working hard. How does that make sense? Or let's say you're the teenager at home with mom and dad. And dad's a hardworking man, mom's a hardworking man. But all of a sudden, you get a job where you make 1,000 times more money than they do combined.
Mm-hmm.
But now they tell you, well, you still live under our rules and you're here at 8 p.m. and you can't have friends over and you can't stay out late and you can't. Well, I do 3/4 of the house payment. I do 3/4 of the food we eat on table. Yeah, but I'm mom and dad. I fund you.
Yeah.
Why are you telling me like I can't when I'm a little kid? This just doesn't make any sense. We tell those stories and people seem to go, huh. Or another one we have is, let's say you and I are on a yacht. Water comes up about an inch. Next year comes up another inch. Next year comes up another inch. It's only 3 inches. The next year comes up to the deck plate where our feet are and starts lapping up against our ankles. And I turn to you and I say, can we at least have a conversation about building a life raft? And you look at me and say, idiot.
It's not, none of this is, these are all good stories that I'm guessing. When you tell people these, it's like this, isn't that where we are? Like, yeah, you know, the federal deal may not be working for us as well as it should. And maybe we could get a better deal, and maybe we deserve a better deal. That's got going on. But I think maybe the other thing, maybe I'll try this way.
Please.
One of the things that's going on is that we kind of forget what it is to be the other guy, and we forget what it is to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, and we forget what it is. And I'm going to use the word, but I don't want to use it in the sort of the sort of the schoolyard video game sort of thing. Is that to be kind of losers, to not to be the winners for that cycle?
Yep.
And one of the arguments is that how democratic institutions and democratic politics work is that when losers have some restraint, that is, the people who've lost out this time go, okay, I'm going to win next time. But it also takes the winners to have some restraint too. It also requires the winners not to do the dancing in your end zone, in your face all the time, trash talking sorts of stuff, because next time they're going to be, the next game they could be losing. And when that happens, you got to feel for the person, you've got to feel for the person. And so we need to think about that, about what would it be like to somebody else. And maybe this is back to the magic wand, and maybe that it will be able to have that moment where they think, what would it be like if someone was just cussing me out all the time, or making me feel bad all the time, or just trying to make it so hard. I mean, if we have that moment, maybe that's a moment that we can have in common.
And I'm sorry, I'm passionate about it. I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible. You have been awesome. Thank you for participating. Thank you for answering all the questions. We're winding down. I do want to ask you, though, this is the question I ask everybody, just to make sure we get it right. I'm not you. I'm not me. I'm a third-party person watching this. They've covered a lot of arguments. What is the key thing you want somebody watching this argument to walk away from? 5 days after watching this video, they're going to be like, wow, they covered this and that and a lot of that, but there was this one clear, coherent thing the professor said, and I can't get that philosophical framework out of my head when I'm thinking about this.
Wow, that's an ask.
I'm sorry.
I don't know.
I went to London and I loved it right after 9/11. The English people were great. We just went from pub to pub to pub. My God, Londoners and English people were so cool. Just buy them a Guinness and they will open up the world to you. Wonderful.
That's, everybody who comes to California, or my relatives who come, love the state and love the welcome they receive from California's volcano, because this is a fantastic state. It's called, I know there are historical reasons why it's called a golden state. It should be called a golden state for the people who live in it, I think is what it should be. It is an amazing place. I think, in all seriousness, I think the issue is we are going to disagree. We're just not going to agree about stuff. We're going to disagree about big things and little things all the time. The question is, how do we resolve those disagreements? And how do we resolve them peacefully and democratically? Because we can win in the short term, but that's not winning in the long term. And so maybe it's this. I will go with a bad analogy, because I've got lots of bad analogies. Yours are much more colourful than mine.
I have some horrible analogies. There's no way that funeral thing. I'm sorry.
That's a stark one. That one's going to stay with me.
It's not good. People said you need a better one. I'm like, it gets through to people. I'm sorry. So I take the cake on horrible analogies. You can have second. Yeah,
place. That's a bad one. I have a simple one with that coffee. It's like,
you're second place. I'm number one when it comes to I'm number one. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to dispute that. That's pretty. They're pretty. Yeah, the
Ferrari. My mom's proud of me for that.
Yeah. Dear. Yeah, that's good. We can, sometimes you can sort of, if you add sugar in your coffee, you can add it a grain at a time, or but if you add it a grain at a time to do this one, at some point you're just going to add it, and then so it's not right there, and then suddenly, blam, it's too sweet if you add too much. Our disagreements, we can have them, and we can make these things where short term we win. But in the long term, it's going to be too much for us unless we exercise some kind of restraint. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that there's an information environment out there that seems to be designed to make us mad. Like fast food is designed to make us eat more salt and fat and sugar and stuff that we don't really need. It's better if we get something else. The media environment seems to design to give us that kind of poor nutrition too, in a way of it tells us stuff that makes us mad, that gets us riled up, that gets us fighting, that gets us hating on each other. And, sure, there are people that we're not going to get along with. There are people that we just disagree with, we're never going to agree with on anything. But that's not true for most people. Most people, we're going to find some point of common ground. So that was a long-winded way of saying it, which is that I think that we have to remember that most people are decent. Most people are trying to do their best. We're going to disagree, but that's okay, as long as we don't let it get out of hand. That's it. That's mine.
That'll be the question.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being willing to do some elastic questions. Go here, go there. I really appreciate that. Not every professor will do that, but I find it's very helpful for the public. The public doesn't understand these higher level order issues on division and what it means and where it could go. They kind of just know it's bad. And so I really like to do these deep breakdowns with the experts and go, here's what the expert's saying. And then I try to translate it for the public. So I don't have a huge base, but so that anybody who watches this, we can all be on the same page. Whether I agree or not, I understand where we're going, what the problems are. So we could at least have a common conversation. At least some of us could have a common conversation where we have the same understanding.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you're doing this. It's a really great thing you're doing. And so I'm pleased to take part. Thank you for inviting me, I should say. Thank you for the stark imagery that I'm going to be left with.
Sorry, you are a great Californian, and we love you.
You too. This is the great thing about the state, right? That we can do this. We can talk to each other. Yeah, I think maybe the last one is, boy, coming up with answers is hard. And I think be wary of instant answers. It's like, yeah, the problems, questions are quite complicated, and it's like sometimes they take a bit of thinking through and a bit of talking through.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll send you a copy of the video in a couple hours. thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. You were awesome, and you're
Oh,
awesome in California.
thanks for doing this. Have a good afternoon and have a good weekend.
Okay. I'll see you across the pond.
Bye-bye. Or in Fresno.
Or in Fresno.